Chapter 28. Time, it seems, is always the enemy, stretching out endlessly beyond a horizon we can't see, or slipping away too quickly, falling weightlessly through our outstretched hands. It seemed ironic that it was me, the one who had always wanted more time for Bella, who had begged, pleaded, and bribed her to extend her human life, that would now be the one to ultimately, in the end, ask to strip away what little time she had left. My suggestion to Carlyle that I didn't think we needed to wait 4 more days for the birth was greeted by surprised silence on the other end of the line. "It's no longer necessary to wait that long," I said in a low voice. Rosalie was behind me, listening intently. That was fine. I wanted her to hear this. "What do you mean, Edward?" Carlyle asked cautiously. "The child shows incredible mental development, Carlyle. His body just can't be that far behind. Even though he is trying not to, he is going to end up hurting Bella, when I'm not sure there is any benefit for him to stay in the womb any longer." "But Rosalie and Bella will not agree," Carlyle said quietly. I turned my head full around to look into Rosalie's face. She was staring at me, her eyes dark and still. "I'm going to talk to them now," I said, holding her eyes with mine. "I understand," said Carlyle. "We will need to discuss this more when I return." "When will you be home?" I asked. "The blood bank will open in the morning. We will leave immediately after we obtain some more blood. I'm hoping we should be home around noon." "Okay, Carlyle," I said. I would convince him then. "Hold on, Edward. Your mother wants to talk to you again." I laughed softly. "We'll figure this out, Edward. We will make it work. I promise you." "Thanks, Carlyle," I whispered, glancing away from Rosalie. Esme got on the phone.
"Edward, I'm so sorry we aren't home with you. I wish I could be there."
"I know, Esme," I sighed. It had been all Carlyle could do to convince Esme they had to wait another night.
"It's enough just to hear the change in your voice," she said softly. "Take care of Bella, and we will be there as soon as possible. I love you."
"I love you too, Esme," I murmured. The line disconnected, and I hung up the phone and turned to face Rosalie. She opened her mouth, but I held up my hand. "Let's discuss this with Bella," I said, turning my back to her and heading down the stairs. Rosalie followed, suspicious and uncertain. Carlyle and Esme had been immediately accepting of the change of situation, having gotten over any initial shock they might have felt hearing Rosalie recounting the story for Emmett by the time they got on the phone with me. Carlyle had been utterly fascinated by the child's mental capabilities, although his mood was tempered, as was mine, by the unchanged weight of the physical risk of the birth. Esme had simply been overjoyed that I had finally been able to find some meaning, some happiness in all of this. Alice was kneeling next to Bella, her head on her stomach, eyes wide, listening to the heartbeat. Jasper was standing, watching several feet away. He was surprisingly concerned to discover this very human element to the baby. Alice stood up when I approached, moving over to Jasper. "No, stay," I said to both of them. I turned to look at Bella. "I'd like to discuss delivering the baby as soon as possible. Tomorrow," I said. Bella's eyes widened in surprise, and Rosalie's teeth clamped together. She was unable to hold back any longer.
"Edward, you know Bella and I have made it very clear. We don't want to deliver the baby until he is completely developed. I heard what you said to Carlyle, but still, how can you be sure?"
"Hold on. Let me explain to Bella," I said, glaring at her before turning back to Bella. "I think we have drastically underestimated the child's development," I said gently. "His mind is one of a fully developed baby, well advanced beyond that, actually. I can't believe his body isn't similarly developed."
"Do you really think so?"
Bella whispered, eyes searching mine. "Yes," I said, kneeling down next to her. She glanced at Rosalie and then at me.
"But will it be safe for him?"
she asked. I think this is actually the safest route for both of you, rather than waiting, I said quietly. The delivery will go much more smoothly if it is planned, much safer for him. I took her hand in both of mine, surrounding her warm, pliant skin in an iron shell of safety. And so much safer for you. Bella nodded slightly, her face pensive.
But there really isn't any way to know for sure,
Rosalie pressed. I glanced up at her. I think that my ability to see into his mind is a far more accurate way to judge his development than counting centimeters, I said, trying to keep my voice even. I looked back at Bella. He's uncomfortable, too big for the space, and sometimes it is difficult for him to control his movements, even if he doesn't want to hurt you.
You really think he's developed enough?
Bella asked again. I could see she was wavering, as anxious as me in some ways for the delivery to be over, but she was also hesitant. Something else glinted in her eyes, and I was suddenly worried it was fear. Bella, I whispered, my chest feeling tight. Why had I been so quick to push this plan? What if Bella wasn't ready? Love, if you're scared, we don't have to do this tomorrow. We have time to think about it. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to rush things.
No, Edward, no,
she said quickly, shaking her head.
I'm not scared. I'm not.
Her heartbeat picked up slightly. Alice glanced at me, then sat down gently on the edge of the couch next to Bella. She reached out and smoothed a strand of hair off her forehead.
It's okay to be nervous, Bella,
she said quietly.
I'm not,
Bella protested.
I mean, not really. I guess... Well, who wouldn't be?
She glanced around the room, looking uncomfortable.
I guess maybe I am a little nervous,
she admitted, shrugging.
Me too,
Rosalie said softly, standing behind the couch. I glanced at her in surprise. Alice leaned forward and touched her forehead to Bella's.
Me three,
she said. Jasper shifted slightly. Well, now I feel nervous too, he said. He smiled gently. Believe me, Bella, we are all with you on this. How you are feeling is perfectly natural. I squeezed her hand slightly. No one expects you to be impossibly brave, love, I murmured. You're only human, Jasper added, still smiling.
For now.
Alice laughed lightly. She put a hand on Bella's knee.
We'll get through this together.
Bella looked around and nodded, her eyes shining softly.
Thanks,
she whispered. Then she turned to me, her face set.
But even though I'll admit I'm a little nervous, Edward, I am ready. I am so ready. I'm done waiting. I just want to be sure he's ready too.
I nodded. He is cognizant of his body and surroundings, very much in control of his movements, most of the time. I truly think this speaks to his developmental level. Bella looked at me, thinking hard. I wondered what it was for her, to be so young, and asked to shoulder the weight of a decision like this, a decision that not only encompassed her own life and death, but that was also tangled and weaved into the lives and futures of everyone she loved. I don't want to pressure you, I said softly. I've done that enough. Bella shook her head, but I went on. This is entirely up to you. I just want things to be as safe as possible for both of you. Bella looked down at her stomach, biting her lip. She pulled in a long, slow breath and then let it out.
Well, he definitely is big and strong.
She laughed, looking up at me.
And apparently smart for his age, like his father.
Her eyes went to Rosalie, and she nodded slightly.
I think Edward is right,
she breathed. I turned to look at Rosalie. Her eyes rested on mine for a long moment, trying to see around her own walls she had built up, defensive walls of mistrust and suspicion.
This isn't just about protecting Bella? This is the safest thing for him as well?
I returned her gaze, but didn't answer. She would just have to find some faith in me. Finally, she sighed, and her gaze moved back to Bella's face.
Yes, all right, Edward,
she thought, smiling and nodding at Bella.
I can't disagree with what you're saying.
I turned back. Bella's smile had turned radiant.
This is so exciting,
she said, kissing my cheek.
Tomorrow, at this time, everything will be different.
Different. A chill went through my mind, not matching the warmth shining off of Bella. Different. How different we did not yet know. Alice drew in a sudden breath.
Charlie will be calling in 15 seconds,
she murmured. Alice had been checking in on Charlie occasionally, making sure he wasn't planning a surprise visit, with or without the FBI and the entire Forks Police Department. She walked over to the phone, holding her hand above it. As soon as it rang, she picked it up and brought it swiftly to Bella. It was better if Charlie didn't get the chance to start asking any of us questions. I could only imagine trying to explain why Carlyle wasn't there. I kissed Bella's hand and stood up. Jasper nodded towards the edge of the room, and we moved just inside the dining room, giving Bella some privacy. Edward, Jasper said quietly, planning the birth for tomorrow doesn't leave us much time to prepare to leave, unless you were planning to wait until Bella wakes up. Leave? There's no way I'm taking the chance of moving her now, I said firmly. And everything we need is here. Jasper nodded thoughtfully. It will be very difficult if we wait until she's changed, traveling with a newborn. He paused suddenly, and his face creased in thought. Well, traveling with 2 newborns, I guess. Alice laughed weakly. And it may be impossible to get past the wolves safely. Do you think the standoff will continue? I asked him. Jasper's laugh was hard. You think this will be over after the birth? He shook his head. They were willing to kill us all, even Bella, when we hadn't even broken the treaty. What do you think they will do when we do break it? The child will not be dangerous, not in the way that they fear. He will be protected under the treaty, just like us. No, not the child, Edward. Bella. He sighed. It is the same issue as always. Once you change her, bite her, the treaty is off, and we will no longer have the support of her wolf, because she will no longer be someone he wants to protect. He will probably turn on her completely. We will have to go. I wasn't sure he was right about Jacob. I hoped, very much so, that he wasn't. But I knew he was right about the treaty. It had originally seemed like Sam wasn't going to attack when he had thought Bella had been changed. But with the current tension, it seemed foolish to rely on that former goodwill. I looked over at Bella, talking animatedly with her father on the phone. She won't want to leave, I whispered, looking back at him. Jasper's eyes narrowed, and he reached up to grip my shoulder. Edward, he said, his voice intense. All Bella will want is blood. Don't ever forget that. His eyes bore into mine, his mind filled with multiple visions of the thousands of newborns he had seen through his years. I gritted my teeth at the onslaught of their wild faces, and his thoughts softened. You promised to keep her far away from any temptation, he said quietly. His eyes moved to Bella then, taking in her swollen form, thinking of the child she carried. He felt I was missing something else, something large and critically important. He looked slowly back at me. She will not be safe around anyone with human blood. Think about it, Edward. I stared back at him, trying to see where he was leading me. Anyone with human blood. A feeling of horrified understanding began to seep into me as I processed his meaning. I turned slightly to look where Bella sat talking. I knew I had foolishly imagined this. Bella, the one I knew, gentle and loving, holding our child. But that Bella would be lost for a while, overruled by the wild cravings of a newborn vampire, the all-consuming, mindless lust for blood, and our child's heartbeats. The scent of human blood probably runs through his veins. Would Bella even be able to be near her own child? Stricken, I looked back at Jasper, our eyes meeting, melted gold and black as night. Rosalie gasped, catching on.
But he craves blood. He's not human,
she said in a low voice. No, Jasper said, but close enough to human that his heart beats. Silently, our eyes all turned to stare at Bella. As if sensing our attention, she glanced up and frowned. We turned quickly away. Don't say anything to Bella, I hissed. She didn't need to worry about that. Not right now. We would worry for her. We have no idea what's going to happen.
Maybe it will be different, because it will be her own child,
said Alice. I looked at her.
Maybe,
she thought, uncertain, returning my gaze.
Bella is special.
Her face clouded over for a moment, eyes losing focus as she tried to search for a clue to this future, but nothing came. She knew this hope was shallow. We all remembered our own mindless craze of vampire youth, and to have to keep Bella and the baby apart would be its own new kind of torture. I tried to shake these thoughts off. We have more immediate concerns, like a safe birth, I said. And maybe I can talk to Jacob about working with Sam regarding the treaty. Jasper's grip on my shoulder tightened. Okay, but you promised Bella, we all did, that we would not let her hurt anyone. We have to go far away from this place, before or after. Even if something can be worked out with the treaty, we must leave as soon as she wakes. His eyes glinted. I know it's hard, Edward. We will be there to help you, and Bella. I nodded slightly.
Charlie will be saying goodbye soon,
murmured Alice. I started to move, but Rosalie wordlessly pressed a hand to my shoulder, not looking at any of us, and then went into the living room. We watched her go. I glanced out the window at the dense forest surrounding the house. I knew that Jasper was right, although I suspected he was being overly cautious. Still, he knew more about newborn vampires than any of us. But I knew that I didn't want to leave this place, with its silent trees and gray skies, this place where the world finally started to mean something to me, and I knew several of the others didn't want to leave either. I would keep my promise to Bella, and I would keep her safe from hurting others, even if that meant moving halfway around the world. Still, inexplicably, I couldn't deny that I harbored a hope that we might be able to work out staying here.
Edward,
I glanced at Alice.
Are you going to say anything to her?
Her eyes were on Rosalie's stiff back.
Remember my vision,
she thought, seeing Rosalie and I embracing in her head. I know, I murmured, thinking Alice might, for once, be off on this one. But I did need to try to clear the air between Rosalie and me, as much as it had ever been. She had protected Bella and our child from me. On one hand, I was enormously grateful for this, but I still couldn't shake the small sliver of anger that remained lodged within me. She had stood in my way, breeding distrust and doubt, when I had feared for the life of my own wife. But she had been right. Bella had been right. And Rosalie had supported Bella in a time when I didn't. I owed her an apology for damning her for that. Rosalie was standing several feet from the couch, still waiting for Bella to hang up. I walked quietly over to her and took her arm, turning her towards me. She saw the expression on my face and knew immediately what I was planning to do.
Don't say anything, Edward,
she thought, her expression fierce.
You don't need to.
Rosalie, I murmured. She placed a hand on my chest and pushed us away from Bella into the edge of the hall under the stairs.
Look,
she whispered.
We both did what we needed to do.
But I was wrong, I said quietly. She stared at me for a moment.
Well, I thought so,
she said.
But not everyone did.
Her eyes flickered behind me to Alice and Jasper. I nodded. That was my fault as well. I'm sorry, Rosalie.
I know.
And I never hated you, I whispered.
I know that too,
she said softly.
But part of you wanted to.
I shrugged slightly. I was sure she must understand how her interference in all this had made me feel. It seemed, sometimes, that you didn't care about the pain or danger to Bella. That was what bothered me the most. Rosalie eyed me.
It wasn't from callousness, Edward, like you always seem to think.
She drew in a long breath, letting it out slowly, her eyes staying on me.
You've always been so much like Carlyle, so compassionate, and now, sometimes, so human. That's Bella's influence.
She smiled back slightly, glancing over my shoulder at Bella, still on the phone. Her eyes moved back to mine.
Compassion is not an emotion that comes easily to most of us, once we become what we are. My emotions may not always be the same as yours, but it doesn't mean that I don't care.
She looked at me, her eyes dark and serious.
Bella didn't want my pity or my sympathy. She wanted my strength.
I could have lost her, Rose, I whispered. I still could.
I didn't think she would die,
Rosalie said softly.
although I knew she was willing to. But I truly thought she could do it, that we could do it. I still do.
She looked over at Bella again, sighing.
When Bella called me to ask for my help, I knew right away I would help her, because she needed me, and simply because I wanted this baby to be born.
She nodded slightly, as if confirming the memory.
But as I waited for you and Bella to return, I realized what she would probably have to sacrifice for this child.
She paused, looking back at me. Her expression was wry.
It's funny, you know, because I was the one who fought hardest against Bella giving up her life and choosing to become one of us. Well, except for you.
She smiled at me briefly.
I said that I would never have chosen this existence for myself. I would not have thrown away my human life, and I've always believed that to be true.
She looked down and studied her hands for a moment, and then she returned her gaze to mine, her eyes shimmering darkly.
But when I grasped that Bella would not make it through this human, I realized that I would have given up my own human life to become what I am now, without a second thought. For my own child, I would have chosen exactly as she has, and so, how could I not support her?
I nodded slowly. Perhaps Bella and I were not the only ones who had been forever altered by this child's unexpected appearance in the world. Rosalie tilted her head to the side.
I guess I could have been nicer about it, though.
She laughed once.
Sorry.
I smiled. Why start being nice to me now? You never have before.
Ha ha,
she said, punching me lightly.
Well, you've certainly been outdoing yourself with the doom and gloom.
True. We are quite the pair, I said quietly. I don't know how Carlyle and Esme have put up with us all these years. I put my hand on her arm. Seriously, though, Rose, I do apologize. I took my anger and frustration on you for much that wasn't your fault. I shrugged with a slight smile. Maybe I just knew you were probably strong enough to take it.
I was.
Rosalie laughed quietly. And thank you for being there for Bella, I said softly.
My pleasure,
she said, smiling, pleased by my words.
Oh, all right. Let's make Alice and her dream visions right again.
She slid her arm around my back to pull me in for a quick hug. I kissed the side of her head, and she pushed me away, rolling her eyes, and went over to Bella, who had just gotten off the phone. Rosalie took Bella to the bathroom. She was shivering when she got back, still running a slight fever. I wrapped her in a blanket on the couch and knelt next to her, rubbing my hands uselessly against her arms to warm her up. Bella glanced around me and out the front window. She was looking for Jacob, waiting for him, and I realized I felt his absence as well. Somewhere along the way, Jacob had come to mean something to me. In loving Bella, Jacob and I were inexorably bound. We had fought together to protect her. We had fought each other to win her. We had hurt one another with our strengths, and been forced to expose our darkest weaknesses. We tried, eventually, to see past the deep-rooted prejudice, to understand the love that Bella gave to each of us. After all that had passed, there was a bond, a sense of brotherhood, at least on my part. I fiercely regretted the pain and betrayal that had threatened to smother Jacob when he left. I knew he would never believe how much I didn't want to hurt him, how tired I was of hurting him, and now I had betrayed him. His survival through all of this had hung, as mine had, on hating, blaming what was inside Bella, and we had been bound together within that hatred, on the same side of an agonizing war. With my acceptance and love of the child, I had, in his mind, stepped to the other side, leaving him even more alone. But I truly felt that, ultimately, we still wanted the same thing for Bella, for her to survive. I hoped that he would come to see that, in the end. We both stared silently out of the window. Bella's eyes were glimmering with tears again, her face pale, guilt-stricken. I felt another lash of anger at Leah and her harsh words. Putting my hand on Bella's, I tried to listen for Jacob's mind, hearing nothing, catching only the whispered thoughts of Seth and Leah, gentle concern and defensive fury. I wondered if he would come back. I thought he would, for Bella, and for his pack. He wouldn't abandon them here. He was too strong a leader. And then the sheer obviousness of the situation emerged before me, and I saw the error of my earlier words to Jasper. I would not talk to Jacob about negotiating with Sam, because it had never really been Sam's decision, any of this. Any power he possessed came to him by default, gifted by Jacob. Jacob was the true alpha now. Our treaty was with the tribe, not Sam's pack, and Jacob was the leader of that tribe. Ultimately, it would be Jacob's voice that would be heard above all others, if he chose to speak, and so I would ask Jacob to overrule the treaty, and I would hurt him again, easing the future for Bella and myself by crushing Jacob with this final blow, for so much would be lost to him either way, in his decision to bless or to curse the woman he loved. Bella sighed, wiping the tears from her eyes. She picked up my hand, kissing it, and then laid it against her stomach.
"Tell me what he's thinking about,"
she sighed. I smiled, focusing. The baby was thinking of Bella's recent words on the phone.
"I love you, Dad."
Bella's voice, loud, warm, and all-encompassing.
"I love you, Dad."
The baby's thoughts wavered with confusion. "He's actually trying to figure out who you were talking to before," I murmured.
"Edward,"
the baby thought at the sound of my voice.
"Edward."
Warmth washed through me.
"Oh,"
said Bella in surprise.
"I guess he doesn't know about phones yet."
A look of sadness swept over her eyes.
"And he doesn't know Charlie's voice."
Her breath hitched slightly. She stroked her stomach, and the baby followed her touch with his mind, the movement like a meteor across the sky. Then suddenly the vision disappeared, leaving only darkness, eyes closed. His mind washed with apprehension as the need to move, to stretch, overtook him, quickly becoming unstoppable. "Oh, Bella," I whispered, grasping her hand. Confusion flashed over her face, and then she groaned, leaning over and clutching her side. Her hair fanned around her face, so I could only see her eyes squeezed shut. Rosalie moved uneasily on the other side of the couch. "Shh," I murmured, pressing my lips to her body. "It's okay." I felt his mind regain control, rein in his movement, as Bella's muscles relaxed and she lifted her head slowly. I rose up and put my hand on her face, smoothing my thumb over her cheek.
"I'm better,"
she said, her voice a little rough. I leaned over and kissed her lips. "This will all be over soon," I murmured, continuing to caress her cheek. "All the pain, all the worry." The words were barely out of my mouth before my mind created an image that crucified that thought. Bella on a bed, our bed, writhing and thrashing, screaming, burning, begging for me to make it end, to kill her. Keeping my hand against her cheek, I bent my head down slightly, so Bella could not see my expression, afraid it would give my thoughts away. What would I say when Bella begged me to kill her? Please God, Edward, help me, make it stop. Please just let me die. I clenched my eyes shut against the pain of this image, and the worst of it was, I knew it would happen. It was what we all did, what we all said, all except for Carlyle. Bella was quiet, watching me, I imagined. I could not bear now to think of those endless seconds, hours, days of torture for her, and deservedly for me. For my existence would be paused during that time. I would be with her every moment, suffering with her, care for her. I would not go forward until we could do it together. I slowly lifted my head, hoping my eyes didn't betray me. There was no reason to burden her with these thoughts now. I reached up and stroked her cheek again gently. She sighed and closed her eyes, pressing against my hand. She was tired. I moved my hand into her soft hair, feeling the silky strands weave through my fingers, and I gently cradled her head against my chest. "You are so beautiful," I whispered. "The most beautiful thing in the whole world, the whole universe." She smiled slightly, eyes still closed.
"I don't feel beautiful these days. I feel huge."
I kissed her lips, silencing her. "Beautiful," I murmured against her skin, wrapping my arms around her. She lay with her head in my arms, growing heavier as she drifted off. Then her eyes opened, dreamy and clear, holding a million memories, and my heart.
"You're going to be a wonderful father, Edward,"
she said peacefully. Then her eyes closed again, and she drifted back off. I sat still, looking down at her relaxed face, stunned by her unexpected words. Father. The word was at once exhilarating and terrifying. I thought of the day Esme had said similar words to me, and the dark denial that had eclipsed my thoughts, the certain knowledge that a monster such as me would never be a father. It was something that could not even be dreamed of or considered, a lost human possibility, buried down deep in the recesses of what would be forever denied. But I was his father, despite all my reservations. The love I felt for this small being I had never met was so utterly unique, and I knew, if faith graced us, and Bella and I remained here on this earth, that I did want to be a good father. I just had no idea how to do it. When I was human, I had expected one day that I would have a family. It was the natural way of things, in my time, but I had long since abandoned a human life. My very existence mocked all that was good and natural to mankind. I had spent so many years as a monster. Was I too long removed from humanity to shoulder the stunning responsibility of caring for something so young? My thoughts turned to the symbols of fatherhood I had held in my life. Usually I thought of Carlyle, essentially my father through these long years, when I reflected upon the ideals, the values I longed to uphold. But in this case it was my human father who was drawn into my mind. My memories of him were faded, blurry, and not nearly as clear as those of my mother. I felt a little sad that I had clung so much harder to my mother's memories than to his, holding close pictures of her face, of those meaningful moments. The vision of my father's face was unfocused, and what I remembered was more vague. He was kind and strong, creating a blanket of safety that hung over our home. He protected and provided for my mother and myself, but beyond that, it was all clouded by the shroud of time forever lost. I lowered Bella carefully onto the pillow, and lay my hand gently against her body, and wrapped my arms around her stomach, almost as if I was holding him in my arms. The cover of my body turned the baby's world into midnight, and he swam in the dark waters. He was replaying dozens of our words during the day over and over in his head, turning them around, learning and loving at the same time, safe, content. But tomorrow He would no longer be swathed in the safety of Bella's body. I felt abruptly, utterly inaccurate. Alice was approaching. She stood over me for a second, and then I felt her hand on my head, slowly stroking my hair. "I don't know how to be a father," I whispered, not looking at her. She continued to stroke my hair.
"You'll have to figure it out, like everyone else, and I know you will."
She leaned down and kissed my head.
"I have complete and utter faith in you."
Her hand remained still against my hair for a moment, and then she quietly walked away. I would have to figure it out, to learn how to fit into this role of father. I had had to learn how to be with Bella, something that also once seemed impossible, unattainable. But I had hurt her badly along the way. Was I destined to make those same mistakes again? My arms clung to Bella. I could feel the baby's movements reverberating throughout my body, and I remembered the utter revulsion I had felt the first time I had felt him move inside Bella. I shuddered, feeling a sharp stab of remorse, and I knew that I would never, never want to hurt either of them again. Laying here, wrapped up with both of them, I was suddenly overwhelmed by how much was at stake, how much was to be gained, and how much could be lost in the next 24 hours. How I would protect the two most important things in my world. I rose abruptly and began to pace the room. I felt Rosalie's eyes follow me as I moved swiftly back and forth. I was responsible for their safety, and I needed to be clinical, thinking and planning to get them both through this delivery, exploring every possible angle. I felt that, if handled with care, delivering the baby should be successful, but there had to be something more we could do to ensure Bella's safety. We didn't really know how long it would take to get the baby out, and how much damage to Bella's body would be done during the process. The greatest danger during that time would be blood loss and stress on the heart. Bella was already weak, worn down by sickness, dehydration, malnutrition, and pain. Although she had improved over the last couple of days by drinking blood, there was no way to know what damage had been done to her heart and health in general. How much could her body take during the birth? How long would her heart hold on? The goal would be to find the fastest routes to get the venom to the heart and to keep her heart beating. For once in the heart, the venom would begin its healing, if you could call it that, and then would spread quickly around the body. Along with saving her, it would make the process quicker. So how to get the venom as directly as possible into the heart? Directly into the heart, I mused. An idea occurred to me.
"Oh!"
Alice's loud gasp shattered my thoughts. Grabbing at her mind, I saw in an instant what she had seen, as she struggled to hang on to the vision. The faintest flicker, blurring out so fast it was barely an image. Bella. She was standing in front of something. A window? No, a mirror. Pale blue covered her slim body. There was a tangible difference to her face. The hue of red flashed by her eyes, and then she was gone. I was upstairs and on Alice in a second. She was standing, frozen in the third-floor hallway. "What was it, Alice?" I demanded. "How did you see it?" Her eyes refocused, finding my face.
"I don't know,"
she breathed. She tried to replay it in her head, but the image was so brief it was fading beyond her grasp. "Try and see more," I said desperately, reaching out to grab her arms with my hands. Her focus wavered as she searched for a future that would not materialize. Now she could only see a painfully unfocused vision of Bella, still asleep on the couch, minutes from now.
"Oh!"
she groaned, squeezing her eyes shut. Her head was splitting with the effort. She tried to lower her head into her hands, but I held her arms tight. "Keep trying," I begged. "Try again, Alice. Try." I was wild, consumed. A vision of Bella, no longer pregnant. I was sure of it. And the red eyes. Where was she? Where was I? Where was the baby? Suddenly, steel hands gripped my shoulders from behind. "Hands off her, Edward," snapped Jasper, voice like ice. I looked down blankly at my hands. They were squeezing too hard into Alice's upper arms, my fingers buried into her skin. I let go quickly, and Jasper pulled me back, stepping between us. "I'm sorry, Alice," I said quietly. She shook her head, rubbing her arms absently with her hands.
"No, it's all right, Edward,"
she said, her face pensive.
"I wish I could have seen more, held the vision for a fraction longer."
"What did you see, Alice?" asked Jasper, wrapping an arm around her.
"Bella,"
she said simply, catching my eyes.
"But it's gone now."
Alice looked down, her mind frustrated. She let Jasper lead her away down the hall, face looking worn and tired. I stood, unmoving, watching her go. She was frustrated, but I felt my determination speeding ahead. It was the first real vision of Bella Alice had seen since we left Isle Esme. It was extremely concerning that it had been so unclear, disappearing so quickly, but it was also a small, radiant glimmer of hope. Bella, alive. Bella, safe. I thought about my final thoughts before the vision had appeared. I finally turned, going down the stairs to the second floor and into Carlyle's office. I closed the door quietly behind me. I looked in a couple of drawers before I found what I was looking for. I picked up the steel syringe, holding it in my palm. Carlyle had ordered it, had it overnighted to the house as soon as we returned home, still hoping we would have a chance to do an amniocentesis. He wanted something strong enough to hopefully penetrate the casting around the womb, and also be able to withstand the vampire-like fluid that might be obtained. I wondered if it would be strong enough to withstand my venom. I planned to find out. I wasn't sure if Carlyle would approve of this idea. It was not considered standard medical practice. Not that the human medical community had ever considered the concept of how best to get vampire venom straight to the heart. I considered calling him first and asking his opinion, but part of me wanted to work this idea on my own, see if I could even prepare the syringe. I could discuss my plan with him tomorrow. I stood in Carlyle's office, syringe lying in my hand, feeling abruptly uncomfortable. I would need to produce venom for this to work. It seemed absurd, as I knew I was terribly thirsty, but now, when I needed the typical response to that thirst, my mouth felt permanently dry. My body had too long grown accustomed to denying its needs. I would need something vivid, something in my mind to provoke the monster. I closed my eyes. I pushed away any thoughts of the scent of human blood, thinking Bella wouldn't like that. Instead, concentrating on the hunt, the noiseless, stealth movements through the forest, towards the far-off scent of a beating heart. Faster and faster, the wind whispering against me, the trees glowing in the night. So close now, the pulsing of blood thundering through me, the scent, thick and alive. I'm on him, his claws entrenched, helpless in the dirt by the force of my contact, his screech lost in my thoughts, razor teeth slicing to the source that inexorably calls to me, and then the rush of warm blood drenching my burning throat, a divine elixir pumping into me with each dying beat of his heart. I opened my eyes. Venom pooled, searing and fresh in my mouth. I carefully took the syringe and placed the tip of it in my mouth under my tongue, pulling back the plunger to fill the steel barrel. I removed it from my mouth and carefully wiped the needle clean. I lay the syringe down on the tray of gleaming, clean medical equipment. I stared at it silently for a long time, trying to accept the reality that I planned to ram this needle full of my venom into Bella's heart, and that I hoped somehow, in this backwards world of monsters and fractured fairy tales, it would be what saved her. I caught the far-off wisp of a familiar mind. Jacob was speeding back towards the house, back to Bella. 3.5 more days, he thought, and here I am, wasting that little bit of time. I sighed. For me, 3.5 days was too long. too dangerous, and for Jacob it wasn't nearly enough. And now I would betray him again, taking away what little time he thought was left, leaving him with nothing, almost nothing. Taking a final look at the steel syringe, I turned and left the office. I would go outside to meet Jacob. We had much to discuss.